That's the physics behind, for example,
another
the reactions.
question people
The reaction, the actual change in mass.
Over the course of the 7 years in which the book was put together.
To respond to the last point that you made, that they were all religious. They were very differently religious, and the feminism of the feminist foremothers were differently motivated. Elizabeth Cady Stanton wrote the Women's Bible, and it was so wild and heretical in her time that she was thrown out of the National Women's Suffrage Association, and it caused a terrible schism in the movement, and Anthony spent the rest of her life trying to patch it up. So it was, and I think most historians, Ellen Dubois at UCLA or Carl Degler at Stanford, they would agree there were these two very differently motivated schools. And one was on universal rights and the other was on, especially the maternal feminism, womanliness and this virtue of sort of taking your capacity as a wife and a mother and your duty to be nurturing to the community and the society. They appealed to very conventional notions of femininity and as I said, this sort of conservative appeal turned out to be quite radical.
Let the conditions of inequality that we suffered under, when we are the oppressor, the dominant class, let's not impose that injustice on the others.
Anybody think that you could have a just system without giving women their rights?
Everyone has an opinion, and we sit around the marketplace and talk about opinion, but what is truth?
With the shareholder, their goal is similar to the business, to maximize profit.
That belief becomes a context for a development of knowledge.
Say physics is the DNA of technology because the rules for how you build new technology starts in physics.
Because Quran challenges the people. It's not only the people of the book, it challenges Muslims.
We say secular, they hear godless. Right. What was intended?
Watch the Scholar's Chair every Monday night.
Our first speaker is Nagar Razavi of the Council on Foreign Relations, and the title of her talk is Reclaiming Their Rights Through Islam, Islamist Feminism in Turkey. And I urge everybody to pay close attention to the terminology, whether it's Islamist or Islamic, as I just made a little slip because there is a difference.
In terms of my research, I could simply have not planned the recent developments in Turkey better this week to fit the timing of the panel. The headlines, I don't know if you guys have been following, in Turkey have read, First Lady in a Headscarf, ? Headscarved First Lady elicits strong reaction from women in Turkey. Turkey polarized over prospect of veiled First Lady. It's getting a little repetitive, as you can tell. Wife of presidential candidate in Turkey draws controversy because of Islamic attire. And this is my personal favorite, beginning of the end of the known Turkey. So why this focus, or could we even argue obsession, on soon-to-be President Abdullah Gül's wife and her headscarf? Why is what she wears making the headlines? The answer is because the headscarf, veil, hijab, whatever term you like to use, has, for better or worse, become the central symbol of the rising Islamist movement in Turkey, which is challenging the Orthodox Kemalist secular system, which has been in place since World War I with Ataturk dismantling the Ottoman Empire. According to the secularists, the veil has been both dangerous and oppressive. It's dangerous to the state, and it's oppressive to the women who wear it. And as all of you know, the headscarf is forbidden in all public institutions in Turkey, including universities, courts, and state buildings. My research is focused not simply on the headscarf issue, however, but rather on the role of Turkish women in this complicated, very divisive debate in Turkey regarding democracy, secularism, Islam, and the future of the Turkish Republic. And a lot of my research is done from personal I actually went to Turkey and conducted a lot of interviews. So before I go into the specifics about the women, I want to give a little bit more context and to explain why I use the term Islamist as opposed to Islamic. In Turkey, I use Islamist because in Turkey, simply by presenting your Muslim faith in a very public and open way, you are seen as making a political statement, especially if you try to enter into universities or into government or into politics. So that's why I make the distinction. So then to step back and to give some more context, there has been a political, economic, spiritual, and social revival of Islam in Turkey, process which began in the 1970s, and which I term Islamism, and a lot of scholars would agree or disagree on that terminology, but it was a development that started all over the Muslim world in the 70s. In Turkey, the character that it's taken is somewhat different than in other places. There's been an economic front known as the Anatolian Tigers. So I don't know if you guys have been following Turkish news, but this is kind of the economic force, the new Islamic middle class that's emerged in the cities outside of Istanbul and Ankara in the east primarily. There's, on the spiritual front, there's a type of Islam known as Islamic Calvinism, which they see as a reformist version of Islam. And then on the political front, we've had several Islamist parties come to power, the latest being AKP, which came to power in 2002 with Prime Minister Erdogan. This is kind of what's been happening on the Islamic front. And from the very beginning, there's been resistance to this from the Kemalist secular orthodoxy. And when I mean resistance, I mean a very emotional, strong resistance to this Islamic revivalism. Let me step back. The headscarf ban was actually only implemented in the 80s. Before that, there really wasn't a concern that a lot of women with headscarves were entering the university. They simply weren't. It was with this revival in the 70s that it became an issue. And just to give an anecdote about how emotional this topic really is for the secular orthodoxy, I was speaking to two young women who I've known for many, many years and who I agree with on almost every issue when it comes to politics. And I was talking to them about the headscarf issue and about AKP, and I was shocked when they told me that they were willing to go to jail simply to murder Prime Minister Erdogan. These are very leftist-oriented women who said that they were so scared of the developments that were happening that they were willing to assassinate the prime minister. Sorry, I'm not going to give any names. But that just gives you an example of just how emotional it is on the secularist side. So where do women fit into all of this? And I'll try to be as brief as possible. On the one hand, they play a very symbolic role. The veil is a very in-your-face representation of Islamism for a lot of people. According to the BBC, 64% of women in Turkey cover. Not all of them are part of the Islamist movement. A lot of them just wear it in the traditional Anatolian way. I'll explain that a little bit later. But for the most part, any woman that is covered that tries to enter a university or a public building becomes political just by her presence. And that's a very interesting and unique phenomenon, I believe, in Turkey. The second role they play is as active participants. They're active in the Islamist movements, they're active in civil society, and they're active in their universities. So what makes the struggle of Turkish women so unique among all the women in the Middle East who are involved in Islamist movements? The Islamist women in Turkey face a triple burden. On the one hand, they have to face the general patriarchy of Turkish society. Domestic abuse, for example, is a huge issue in Turkey, and all women across cultural, religious divides are struggling with this issue. They also face extreme discrimination in the workplace. They also must challenge, on another front, they must challenge conservative Muslim men who don't want them to be a part of their movement and who continue to justify things such as honor killings and forced early marriages in terms of Islam. And then on the third front, they must fight against the secular establishment, which sees them as enemies of the state and which sees them as oppressed, backwards, and anti-modern. A young gentleman that I spoke to said that he was so proud of the Turkish Republic for banning the headscarf because it, quote unquote, liberated women, and he was so glad to be a part of that. So then how have the women responded to this triple burden? They've responded in 6 ways, and I'm going to be very quick. One, they've reclaimed Islam for themselves. They've gone back to school and they've educated themselves on Islamic law, on Islamic jurisprudence. A lot of them have actually become women imams. Turkey has 400 officially sanctioned women imams. They can only conduct prayers with other women, but they do a lot of scholarly work. In this way, they're showing themselves as sophisticated, educated, but devout women, so they're challenging on that front. A lot of them have gone to outside bodies, such as the European Commission on Human Rights. Unfortunately, they've lost in all of those cases. The European Court has sided with the government, saying that a government can enforce secular laws in public institutions. Merve Kavarakce, who is very famous, member of parliament who was kicked out of parliament, went to the UN in 2005 to also appeal to the UN. Unfortunately, nothing's really come out of that. She's actually living in the United States, and I believe she spoke here, or other representatives from her NGO came to speak here. Which leads me to the third thing, which is women are joining civil society initiatives such as AKDER, which I know that they had representatives here to speak previously. The fourth thing they've done is they've reclaimed the veil, which leads back to the first point, which they've kind of moved beyond the Anatolian veil, which is just what conservative old women in the East used to wear. Just something on your head, it doesn't matter what it's covering. These women are wearing the new Islamist headscarf, where it's tightly wrapped around your face. It's often colorful, it's very chic. They match it up with modern clothing. And in this way have shown that wearing a headscarf has nothing to do with being rural or backwards or uneducated. They're showing that you can be sophisticated and also be covered. The fifth thing that they're doing is they're entering the universities despite the ban. They'll either put wigs on their head, so it's very disarming when you're walking outside the university and see women with clumps of hair in their hand, because they're gonna put it on their head when they go into the school. I just heard recently there's one university that's banning wigs, so really there's a ridiculous process going on. And then finally, most importantly, they're joining these political movements such as AKP. They were in Refah and Virtue Party before, but those were outlawed. And they're really the biggest supporters of these political parties. So what's my argument? What is the point of me even doing all this? My argument is the Turkish government needs to stop marginalizing these women and to stop taking such extreme stances on the veil. In doing so, they're actually radicalizing the movement, and it's moving the women away from democratic, nonviolent processes and forcing them to ally, despite the fact that they don't want to, with more extremist groups who advocate for completely overthrowing the system. If you can't go by one mean, you have to go through another mean, even by from a tactical perspective. So ultimately, these women are not going to take their headscarves off. I know all the secularists want them to suddenly in this great demonstration of throwing off the veil, but it's just not going to happen. So what is the solution? The solution is that the Turkish government needs to accommodate them before they join these radical movements. And in fact, by encouraging them to be a part of it, they're going to have a moderating effect on the movement as a whole, because as women, as educated Muslim women who understand the texts and who can fight for their rights within Islam, they're going to ultimately challenge those conservative and radical elements that seek a very extreme form of Islam, which is going to create a type of state that the secularists are actually afraid of seeing. So I'm going to end there. If you have any questions, please ask in the question portion. Thank you.
I think it would make a wonderful course. I'm really quite fascinated. But what I'm also interested in is this whole thing of orality and of the ear, and we don't take it in by the ear, and we don't realize how much is conveyed. And of course, Michael Sells is very good on all of that in the Tajweed tradition, even of the reciting. But of course, it leads you to wonder, well, if it's all, if we have to know original Arab, a Quranic Arabic, and we have to this and we have to that, and we can't hear it properly, then how are we able to access this message that is supposed to be for all of us in all times? And of course, we're all debating that. And that's what a lot of the new Islamic feminism is about, is trying to find ways into the meanings. And as far as feminism, there are many definitions, but mine would never privilege women. I mean, the point is that there is a notion of equality, and that people should not be divided and there should not be subordination. And so if some class or race or gender is subordinated or deprived of some kind of justice and equality, then we need corrective measures. And so that's how I would approach that. And I found Christina Summers' paper. Of course, it fascinated me a lot because I have studied and thought about feminism and done huge amounts of empirical work in Egypt. And I have different kinds of things to say, but I'll use the Egyptian case, which is in a sense a pioneering case. The Egyptian feminists were sort of on board, or feminists in Egypt. Some of them came from other countries at the end of the Ottoman moment in Egypt. But and so there are lots of echoes in other parts of the Middle East and other parts of the world, really. But the feminism, the consciousness, and then the early coalescing of ideas and movement to effect change was never, I would never call it Enlightenment feminism. Hoda Sha'rawi, I wouldn't put in that category, or someone like Malakifni Nassif or Nabawiya Musa or any of those, Aisha Taimouriya before. The way I see this is that they were using, and now I'm not talking about Aisha Taimouriya, it's a little bit too early, but when you get to the very end of the 19th century, flip and over into the 20th century, you have women using ideas of Islamic reform, Islamic modernism from Muhammad Abdu type of ideas, and the ijtihad comes back into the forefront. I mean, that we must re-engage in religious texts. Now, most of the women at that time did not have the education to do it themselves, so the women that I studied, like Sha'rawi and that lot, were engaging with the ideas of Abdu that were circulating. And by the way, the chapters that have to do with the notion of covering and seclusion and so on in Qasim Amin's Tahrir al-Mara, the liberation of the women, are quite conclusively, I wouldn't say proven, but there's a lot of evidence that these were actually written by Muhammad Abdu, and I can go into that more later, but at another time. But the thing is that there was always this religious presence, and whatever women wanted to change in their lives or change in the gender relations and so on, it was grounded in what they believed to be another reading of the Quran, a move away from this what we would call now patriarchal reading, and that yes, they also used the discourse of secular feminism, and secular feminism simply meant a state that would include Christians and Muslims, and it wouldn't be a religiously defined state as under the Millet system in the Ottomans. So that's what secular meant. Didn't mean without religion. In fact, religion was very much present always. And as you know, when the feminists wanted to change the Muslim personal status law, of course they used religious argumentation. When if they wanted to get out of the house or take off the hijab or even go to school, the face veil, not this. They used religious argumentation, and they used also nation-building argumentation, and so on. So it was a very intermixed thing. Now, Islamic feminism comes on board as a named, recognized phenomenon, that is in the late 1980s, early 1990s, when a set of women, and these are scholars, start reading the Quran, doing tafsir, doing very deep, if you will, engaged study to find out what's going on they ask a lot of questions about women and men and the gender issues, and but they're talking. Their discourse is building up within a religious context. So, interestingly, they become, by the so-called secular feminists, which just means feminist. It doesn't mean. It's just feminist. Period. They're the ones that confer the name Islamic feminism because they see it as a discourse that is specifically grounded. So it's as if that piece of their discourse had come out and was more highly elaborated. And so that is what that is about. Now, the other thing is that some people were engaging in both discourses at the same time, not so many in the beginning, but as Christina is rightly pointing out, that by now there's a lot of crossover, and also because the ideas were taken by the activists, that also has spread them out. And for example, when women were able to, finally became judges in Egypt, and it was, you're right, sorry, I forgot your name suddenly. Olivia. That they use these fierce religious arguments, of course. So you had to argue back with religion, even though the point was politics. And but at the end, of course, there was a lot of pressure, and there was and it was a politically opportune and necessary moment when, in fact, they became judges. But what happened was, by that time, the secular, and by secular I just mean those women who aren't always focusing overtly on religious identity and expressing it as a more public thing, and who aren't necessarily the specialists. They came together, and they also, politically and with their arguments, and that helped. And the same thing with the Mudawana in Morocco. Now, I got the impression, and the other thing I want to say is there have been a lot of successes. And so we're not waiting for the future. To some extent, the future is already with us. And also that this is just a more intensified elaboration of what was going on earlier, because we now have people. Hoda Sharawi did not go to school. She did not go to university. She did not have the PhD. She did not have those tools, the skills. She did not have the ability to be there. So this is the context in which I would put this. The other thing I just want to very quickly say is that I had the advantage of seeing the abstract, your abstract. And so I, not having my whole library here, but I tick. And the thing is that all of those women you mentioned, our forebears, they were all talking religion. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton, did the Woman's Bible. And the thing is, it was a critique, yes. It was kind of a tafsir. It was a kind of hermeneutics. And all of those women that you mentioned took religion seriously. They deconstructed it because they were angry, just like these folks over here in Egypt were angry because people had done a job with their text. And even Willard, Willard was a socialist. And so I don't think it was about, the hearts and minds and religion. I think it was about, and also by the time we did get the vote, there had been so much political work done. And so I wouldn't kind of cut it that way. That although I was really pleased to see that you brought it up, but I just think that all of those figures really cared and used religion, but they weren't going to go along with that male interpretation. And
Anyways, so I'm glad that I'm able to respond, I hope intelligently to the question. You bring up a very good point, and the reality is that there were many, many women who advocated on both sides. There are no both sides. On all issues, there's a whole spectrum. The reality that I have found in Turkey in the last 2 years that I've visited is that since Refah Party came to power, it really became scary for the younger generation of secularists, Kemalists who'd grown up in the tradition, that, we can no longer say that religion doesn't have a powerful role in our society anymore. The old generation used to say, we're moving beyond it, we're progressing in a different way. Yes, it's okay, we can allow a little bit more freedom, but what I see among the young people, and I have to admit I mainly spoke to young people, is that they're genuinely afraid that given the popularity of these political parties, that Islam really is on the rise in Turkey and that it is going to change the system fundamentally. And that's where I saw the polarity happening. So you're right, it is a younger generational thing.
And that's important to locate it in the last couple of years.
Just quickly to respond to the last point that you made, that they were all religious. They were very differently religious, and the feminism of the feminist foremothers were differently motivated. Elizabeth Cady Stanton wrote the Women's Bible, and it was so wild and heretical in her time that she was thrown out of the National Women's Suffrage Association, and it caused a terrible schism in the movement, and Anthony spent the rest of her life trying to patch it up. So it was, and I think most historians, Ellen Dubois at UCLA or Carl Degler at Stanford, they would agree there were these two very differently motivated schools. And one was on universal rights and the other was on especially the maternal feminism, womanliness and this virtue of sort of taking your capacity as a wife and a mother and your duty to be nurturing to the community and the society. They appealed to very conventional notions of femininity and as I said, this sort of conservative appeal turned out to be quite radical because the women, they were able to change the political domain and feminize it in some way, so women were willing to go there. Whereas the other style of feminism just didn't seem to work. And no one knows this better than Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony because they anguished over it year after year after year for 40 years, really. They were in the desert. And then this new group came along and was making a very different appeal. And as I said, Elizabeth Cady Stanton was horrified. She didn't like Frances Willard and the religiosity and so forth, but they accepted it, and eventually that style of feminism helped to win the vote.
If I understand correctly, the question that was posed to me is sort of why I was on this this panel.
Oh no, I didn't mean to.
No, it's okay. I mean, I think that it's a fair question. I didn't really speak.
I wasn't posing that. I actually.
Okay.
On the contrary.
But I guess my response to that would be that the motto of my organization is human rights through the rule of law, and I guess I would take that a step further and say feminism through the rule of law. And that's really, I suppose, what I was getting at with my talk. And just one little addition is that I wasn't able to really give an accurate, complete picture of what we did during this training with the judges, and I did bring with me some copies of the report that my organization did on it, so if anyone is very interested, they're welcome to come see me afterwards, and I can give you a copy of the report.
In your remarks on the feminism, and I guess I would say broadly speaking, absolutely, feminism means correcting any bias in the past, but as Nagara said, when I read that you were the chairperson, I thought about it and I said, well, I'll distract her by saying this is absolutely not feminist, so you'll lighten up on the other criticisms. So it worked. So yes, it worked. Thank you. And in terms of, you know, the use of orality or not using translations, absolutely, one has to use translations. There's no question about that. But what I think needs to be done is the text has to be taken back, and we have to go back to the original source in the way that it's heard, so that things that have, when you see in a translation that something is altered completely to be a feminine, to the female, applied strictly to the female, and I didn't get the chance to finish it, it turns out that it is not female in the end, and it's meant to mislead. So when you hear it, you recognize it. When you understand the Arabic, you recognize it. The translations should be a useful tool, an asset to anyone, and certainly there's truth in them, but there's also a lot of flaws in them, and if you want the absolute perfect truth, you go back to the Quran, and that's a basic gist that I have. Otherwise, it's important. Yeah, otherwise, I'm largely in agreement, but the point is we have to take back the text from translators who would insert things that are a little incorrect. I just want to say one thing, because Irshad Manji, of course, is rather controversial, and we're not going to, I mean, that's not the topic of the conversation, but I just wanted to be clear that I was at the WISE conference all those hours and all those sessions, and she actually wasn't there, and she wasn't part of it.
Oh,
no, I mean, that's important because...
no, she was part of it. She just must not have, she was on the program.
She wasn't part of the living orality presentation embodiment. She was not there for whatever reason. I just wanted to, to say that point. It was a very large gathering of people from across a wide spectrum, all of whom were not Muslim,